Okay, welcome everyone. Before we begin, we want to note that closed captioning is available for today's session, and you can enable it by clicking on the three dots on the bottom of the screen and selecting captions. We also ask that if you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and we'll be holding a Q&A at the end of the session, time permitting. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Karyn Bishof, and I am a March 2020 Longhauler and founder and president of the COVID-19 Longhauler Advocacy Project. We are a patient-led volunteer and grassroots nonprofit dedicating to advancing the understanding of and solutions to long COVID through advocacy, education, research, resource development, cross-sector collaboration, and support. Almost every day, we hear from patients in our community about how hard and how unfair the disability claims process can feel. For so many people living with long COVID, these benefits aren't optional. They are a lifeline to survival. As infections and reinfections continue and more people are finding themselves needing this support, we've seen disability rates increase 20% since the start of the pandemic in the US alone. We know that there are tens of millions suffering in the US and hundreds of millions suffering worldwide, now living with long COVID. Yet there is still limited clinician education, limited research, and far too little understanding in the systems that are supposed to protect us. Today, you'll be hearing from Senior Partner Andrew Kantor of Kantor Kantor LLP, one of the nation's leading law firms focused exclusively on insurance benefits denials. Andrew will walk us through legal strategies and the disability insurance process, while I'll share from the patient perspective and experience. Together, we'll cover private disability insurance, both short and long term, as well as Social Security disability insurance. Our goal is to break down the process, highlight common challenges, and share practical advice to help you advocate for yourself. Above all else, we want you to leave this conversation and session feeling empowered, informed, and supported. Now it's my pleasure to turn over things to Andrew. He has dedicated his career to helping individuals and families fight back when insurance companies and government systems deny the benefits they're entitled to, including countless long COVID and disability claims. Andrew, we are grateful to have you and your expertise here today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karyn. Appreciate that very much. So first, I want to thank you all for having me here. Also, thank you all for saying hello in the chat. It's nice to have that positive energy when you all jump in, and it sounds like you're excited to hear what I have to say, which I certainly appreciate. I want to start with a little bit about me, who I am and what I do. So as Karyn mentioned, our firm, all we do is insurance litigation. We sue insurance companies for not paying claims they're supposed to pay. And 85 to 90% of our business is disability insurance. So pretty much my entire career, all I've been doing is litigating disability claims. When I first started practicing law about 10 years ago, I was first assigned about 20 pre-litigation appeals, all disability cases, and about half of them were MECFS cases, chronic fatigue syndrome cases. And a lot of the lawyers weren't entirely sure about them. But when I looked closely at these cases, well, they were being denied because these people were suffering really badly, but there wasn't a really good way to prove it. And that dynamic was pretty much all the source of all of our cases, people with really severe issues, but for whatever reason, not the easy ability to prove that those issues are disabling. And so I started my career kind of jumping into a niche, focusing a lot on MECFS claims because they were so strong and frankly, people needed so much help. And when COVID came and then long COVID came, I immediately saw like, wow, this is extraordinarily similar. The symptoms are similar, the experiences are similar, and lo and behold, the way insurance companies deny claims is very similar. I know this may be, ironically, one thing that long COVID did for the MECFS community was give MECFS a little bit more credibility than it had. Basically, everyone knew what COVID was. And when people started alleging long COVID, a lot more people took it seriously than they did MECFS. And seeing the similarities between it and MECFS, at least insurance companies all of a sudden started treating all of these claims a little more seriously. Not a lot more seriously, not as seriously as they should, but a little more seriously. Throughout my career, I've worked on all kinds of disabling diagnoses, claimants with disabling diagnoses. Multiple sclerosis, lupus, and Sjogren's syndrome are just a few examples, but our experience is pretty wide range as far as that goes. So first, I want to give you an overview of disability benefits generally. So when I'm talking about the word disability, The definition will vary a little bit depending on what exactly I'm talking about, but for the most part, the definition is, in simpler terms, being unable to work despite reasonable accommodations. There's a few main sources of disability benefits, two of which I'll be talking about in detail today, and two which I'll touch on quickly. So the main sources of disability benefits, which I will be talking about, are Social Security disability insurance, which I always call SSDI, and private short-term and long-term disability. I use LTD. I try and avoid the STD acronym for obvious reasons. But that's what I specialize in, is short-term and long-term disability disputes. We'll be talking about that as well. There's two other sources of disability primary sources of disability benefits that anybody can get in certain situations. The first is state disability. So if you are a resident of California, Washington, or a few other states, you could have access to state disability benefits, which is basically a short-term disability plan offered from the state. California's is extremely strong. It can offer you up to $60,000 a year, or $60,000 for a year, if you can establish disability. Other states are not nearly as strong. I know Washington has a Paid Family Medical Leave Act, which overlaps with FMLA and gives you a little bit of benefits. But unfortunately, I think 44 out of 50 states don't have any state disability. The other potential source of benefits, if you become disabled, is workers' compensation. Now, there's a pretty major obstacle in getting workers' compensation claims approved or paid when you have long COVID, because you have to not only prove that the initial COVID exposure happened at work, you also have to somehow prove that initial exposure is directly linked to what you're experiencing today. And that's difficult because it requires basically the doctors to not only acknowledge and confirm all of your symptoms, but have a specific theory of which COVID exposure caused your long COVID, which most people have multiple exposures. If you were exposed each time at work, there shouldn't be a problem being able to link what you're dealing with now to being exposed at work. But if you have any trouble linking your actual exposure to your workplace, it comes pretty hard to get those claims paid. One thing I'll say is that, state disability in a lot of places is pretty easy, all things considered. You can go online and just apply for it. You get the forms filled out, and usually it's paid. Workers' compensation is not like that. From what I understand, I'm not a workers' compensation lawyer. It is a very tough system to work within. The most workers' compensation claimants I deal with have back, shoulder, and mechanical issues, and what they tell me is the care is just not very good, and it's very hard to get approved. So if you know you were exposed at work, and you were only exposed at work, you should certainly consider filing a workers' compensation claim. If you're considering that, the easiest thing by far to do is to talk to a workers' compensation lawyer. They usually specialize in it, in that and only that, because it's a very complex system. So first, I'll talk a bit about SSDI. In order to get SSDI, you have to expect to be disabled for at least a year. You also have to be eligible by working in a job covered by SSDI taxes, which most are. There's only a few jobs which are exempt from it. The rule is that you have to have what is akin to 10 years of work credits before you become disabled, and 5 of those years have to occur within the last 10 years. So if you've been working for 30 years and you have 10 years at any point, you're great. If you only have 5 of those years, and if you have less than 5 of those years over your past 10 years, you need more credits to be eligible. So it's kind of a complicated system. The easiest way to know if you're eligible is to go on the website and apply. You have to also meet the Social Security definition of disability in order to be eligible. In the simplest terms, it's the inability to work in any significant capacity. Technically, what that means to the Social Security Administration is that you are unable to earn $1,620 per month. That amount goes up every year. But if you are unable to earn $1,620 per month or more, you should be eligible. Which also means if you're on Social Security disability, you can earn less than that and still be eligible. So the actual benefits you can get from SSDI right now, again, the numbers change every year. The maximum one claimant can get is $4,018 until your Social Security retirement age. You can get an extra 50% on top of that if you have dependents under the age of 19. They pay till age 18 or until the 18-year-old leaves and goes to college and leaves the house. So you get a few extra months once they turn 18. The claim process for SSDI, it's usually very easy to start, and that's when the easiness ends. You file the application online. They'll then ask you a lot of information about your doctors, about your disability, about what you're going through. They'll request all your medical records, and the SSA will do an initial review. Something like the last time I looked into these numbers, something like 80 to 85% of claims are denied at the initial stage. A lot more of them are overturned, but do not be discouraged if your initial claim is denied. That is the norm, not the exception. If it is denied, it's probably a good idea to talk to a Social Security disability attorney because they can really help you out. If you're going through the process, there's a few things that they may have you do. They may have you undergo an evaluation. It may be a physical evaluation, a mental evaluation, a cognitive evaluation, or they may have you do some combination of all three. If you are denied, you have the right to appeal. You can initiate your appeal within 60 days, and then that is definitely a good time to talk to an SSDI lawyer because they will help you appeal and help you understand your chances of winning or losing. The practical reality of SSDI, the process can be lengthy and extremely frustrating. As I just said, many valid claims are initially denied, which is why understanding how the system works is really important. A lot of people do get discouraged and don't appeal if they're denied. Not only is this a bad idea for your benefits themselves, it's also a bad idea if you have long-term disability insurance because your long-term disability carrier probably requires you not only to apply, but to also appeal. And if they want to get really sneaky, what they can do is if you fail to appeal, they can take the benefits you would have gotten had you appealed if they pay your long-term disability benefits and reduce it by the amount you should have gotten in SSDI. That's a fight we've fought many times, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, unfortunately. If your SSDI claim is denied, I definitely do recommend an SSDI attorney. Their fees are actually capped by statute. As a plaintiff's lawyer, relatively, I think their fees are capped at a pretty reasonable level. The fees are initially capped at $9,000, and then they can get up to 25% of your back payment if there's a large back payment, but that's it. And as lawyer fees go, that's pretty good. One upside, one traditional upside for Social Security is that the closer you are to your Social Security retirement age, traditionally, the easier it is to get approved. Basically, a 55-year-old with the same exact conditions as a 35-year-old, the 55-year-old is much more likely to get approved. Unfortunately, if you're in your 30s or 40s, it's traditionally very difficult to get approved. It's definitely possible, but you usually need a lot of evidence to support your claim. I don't like being the bearer of bad news in these presentations, but sometimes that is what I end up doing. With the Trump administration and the new Social Security administration head, oops, sorry, jumped too fast. There is a proposal that is picking up steam, which my Social Security lawyer colleagues believe is probably going to be passed, which changes the rules to make it much harder for people who are between 50 and 60 to get Social Security. It used to be so that if you're between 50 and 60, there's special rules where you don't have to meet quite as high of a burden as if you're under 50. What they're trying to do is erase that and make that age start at 60. I can't tell you how devastating that would be for the people who are in their 50s applying for Social Security. There are a lot of them. And this would be just, another thing to further close the doors on people who otherwise rightfully deserve benefits. It's extraordinarily upsetting, which I'm sure you can all appreciate as well. Oops, before I go too fast. So that's kind of the summary of Social Security. We definitely will answer Social Security's at the end of the presentation, Social Security questions at the end of the presentation. But again, if you have a claim and if you've been denied, it does make a lot of sense to call a long-term disability lawyer, a Social Security lawyer. Some Social Security lawyers will take your case at the initial claim stage. A lot of them won't take it till it's been denied. So if you talk to lawyers and they tell you to apply on your own first, don't be discouraged by that either. That doesn't mean they're not interested in the case. They just want to see if you can get it paid first without their intervention. So that was Social Security. So short-term disability and long-term disability. So this is insurance coverage, just like health insurance, that is usually offered through your employer. It's an employee benefit like anything else. You can also individually purchase coverage through a broker. It can be expensive. It's usually something that's done by higher income individuals, doctors, sometimes lawyers, engineers, things like that. But a broker is a good person to talk to. If you're not sure if you have long-term disability coverage through your employer, just ask them. Send your HR an email and ask them if you have long-term disability coverage. If you don't, feel free to ask why not. And it's not that expensive for an employer to implement. Unlike health insurance, one big thing to be aware of with long-term disability, health insurance pre-existing condition limitations were stricken. They're no longer legal for health insurance. They are definitely still legal for long-term disability insurance. So what this means is if you start working at a job and you've had long COVID symptoms leading and been treated for your long COVID leading up to you getting that job, you have to wait either a year or 2 years to file a disability claim based on long COVID or anything related to those conditions without the claim being kicked entirely as pre-existing. Short-term disability is sometimes subject to pre-existing condition limitations as well, but long-term disability is always subject to it. So short-term disability usually lasts 6 months. It can last between 3 and 9, depending on what kind of policy you have. Long-term disability also lasts until Social Security retirement age, so it should go for as long as your Social Security disability goes. The amount of benefits you get is usually 60 to 70% of your salary, sometimes subject to a monthly maximum amount. So if the monthly maximum of the policy is 20,000 and your 60% of your income is 22,000, you'd only get paid the 20,000 a month. The amount of money you get per month is reduced by other disability income, such as Social Security disability and state disability. Also, it's usually reduced by workers' comp as well. It's also really important to look at your policies because most policies have what's called an any occupation transition. So for the first 2 years, your policy will pay you if you are unable to do your own job. For me, that would be me being unable to be a lawyer. And after that, I have to then prove I'm unable to do any occupation in order to keep my benefits in force. Now, any occupation is usually not literal. It doesn't mean that I can be, a sign flipper on the street or something like that, or a ticket taker making a much lower income, and that would qualify for any occupation. What any occupation usually means is a job you can be retrained for that will earn you as much as you're earning in disability benefits. Now, there's a lot of variation about the policies and exactly the way they work, but there's a lot of variation in how any occupation is defined. So look carefully if you're considering this. But it usually has what's called an income qualifier, where the any occupation has to earn you what you're earning in disability benefits. Whenever I'm giving a presentation about disability benefits, I always talk about this transition. It's one thing that long COVID claimants probably have to worry about less than other claimants. The any occupation transition is usually meant for really specific mechanical issues with the body. So let's say you're a dock worker and you lift 100-pound barrels of 100-pound steel beams every day and you bust your shoulder. You definitely can't do that job anymore. But after 2 years, you could do a different warehouse job, or you can be a warehouse clerk where you don't have to lift more than 25 pounds. That's really what any occupation is designed for. When you're disabled from fatigue, cognitive impairment, overall pain, it's very rare that they're going to be able to find you a job that you can do when you can't do your own job. So the bigger hurdle for people with long COVID is usually getting the initial claim paid rather than protecting yourself through this 2-year transition. There are some really important policy provisions to look for if you have a long-term disability policy. The first is mental health limitations. Now, do not take this the wrong way and make this to interpret this as me saying long COVID is a mental health condition. That is absolutely not what I believe. What these policies have are 2-year limitations on mental health issues. So basically anything the insurance company calls a mental health issue, they'll only pay you for 2 years of benefits. And what insurance companies are phenomenal at doing from their perspective for years is classifying anything they can as mental health related in order to limit the benefits. When they can't outright deny and they know there's too much evidence to say you are not disabled, what they'll do is call long COVID or ME/CFS or MS a mental health limitation. One thing that can often make this more complicated for long COVID and sometimes ME/CFS claimants is, from my experience, a lot of people go to the doctor not knowing they have long COVID. They go get treated. The doctor can't find anything wrong. And the only person willing to certify disability at that point is a therapist or psychiatrist because they're saying there's something wrong. I know what it is, but we can't figure out exactly what the physical mechanism is. And so you start your claim based on mental health issues. And then 9 months later, you find a doctor who actually knows what's going on. Then you're diagnosed with long COVID. What the insurance company will definitely say is after 2 years, oh, this is a mental health related issue. We don't care that you were diagnosed with long COVID. We don't care that you have all this physical support. You filed your claim initially as a mental health issue. That's what we want to call it. I think I love taking those cases. It's not a very good argument for insurance companies, but that's something they will always try to do Especially because I'd say 90 to 95% of people, when they are disabled from anything, also end up having some mental health struggles because being disabled and not being able to work and being in pain from anything is really devastating. So almost all of my clients are getting mental health treatment, and insurance companies love to cherry pick lots of them and try to say, oh, your issues are primarily mental health related, not physical. So keep an eye out for that. Another provision, which thankfully is becoming less common, is something called a subjective symptom limitation. It's also called an objective evidence requirement. Basically, it's another 2-year limitation on benefits. So if the insurance company says you're disabled from what they call subjective symptoms, they will only pay you for 2 years of benefits. There are a few ways around this. The easiest way, obviously, would just be to give them objective evidence. But of course, what they define as objective evidence is very different than what we define as objective evidence. There's a few things you can do when they're making this argument. If you've already given them the test results, you've already given them MRIs, you've already given them heart studies, like if you've given them anything you already have and they're still saying there's no objective evidence, what they're saying is there's no objective evidence of disability. And this is an argument they use all the time, because what they're saying is you don't have proof that you're fatigued, or you don't have proof that you're cognitively impaired. But there isn't always proof of these things, especially fatigue. That's not something your doctor will give you, not something your doctor expects. So that's something that if you get denied on that basis, it's really important to talk to a lawyer, because it's one of the things we specialize in. Another type of limitation in the policies, which I'm seeing more of, unfortunately, and this is really bad news, are limitations based on fatigue-related illnesses, where policies will only pay 2 years for any disease which they define as a fatigue-related illness. There are several variations of this limitation that I've seen. They're still new, and there still has not been a lot of litigation about them, but I expect to do a lot of fighting about what that actually means. A lot of the clauses just say fatigue-related illness, and they don't define they don't define anything else. So what the heck does that mean? I wouldn't call long COVID a fatigue-related illness in that definition. Some policies say basically any disease where fatigue is the primary disabling factor is a fatigue-related illness. And there's ways to get around that as well. Usually you have to really prove up the cognitive aspects. But I really hate seeing those limitations. In fact, I wish, Vermont is the one state in the union which has banned mental health limitations. That's one of my pet projects. Something I want to do before I retire one day is to somehow figure out a way to ban mental health limitations, and maybe fatigue limitations as well, because they should just go away. I talked a little bit about the any occupation transition. Again, not all policies have it, so make sure to look carefully. But again, in my experience, when you're facing these 2-year limitations, the any occupation limitation is not there. The transition is not the biggest threat. The biggest threat is the other limitations if they're in there. So the way the claim process works basically is like Social Security. They'll ask you for a claimant statement, which has all your information in it, and you can fill out the details about your disability, as well as a supportive statement from your doctor, and they will also request medical records. It's basically an opportunity for you to fill out their forms, to give them the information they're asking for. One tip I have is don't feel limited to their forms. Type out anything you want to say, staple it to the back, especially the physician forms, because the physician forms are often not designed for fatigue-related illnesses. They're designed for everything, and it doesn't actually encapsulate what you're going through. One other thing, which I may mention again later, is consider taking a diary of your symptoms and keeping a log, and sharing that with your doctor. Having your doctor understand what your symptoms are outside of the office and how often they're happening can help your doctor support your disability claim. Another thing the insurance companies may do is send you for an independent exam. Now, there's 2 versions of this exam. They'll either have your medical records reviewed by a paper doctor, which means they'll just review your medical records, or they'll send you for an in-person exam with a doctor. In my experience, if they are sending you to an in-person exam with a doctor and long COVID is your primary disabling condition, they are setting you up for a denial. They did the same thing with ME/CFS claimants. There is no way any third-party doctor is just going to look at you, move your arms around, test how much you can lift, and then figure out how you're disabled from long COVID. And they know this. So they're pretty much setting you up for a denial, in my opinion. And depending on why they're doing it or who they're sending you to, there's a lot of different things you can do to counteract that. If they're sending you for a cognitive exam, a neuropsychological evaluation, which is the best way to measure cognitive impairment, I strongly advise calling a lawyer immediately, because what you probably want to do is get your own exam, rather than going to their doctors, because their doctor is going to be biased, and a doctor you choose will probably give you a much fairer shake rather than their hired doctors who are pretty much hired, in my humble opinion, for the purpose of finding ways to deny you, not to actually give you a fair shake. So the practical reality for LTD. Most LTD, if you get your long-term disability through your employer, it is governed by a federal law called ERISA. ERISA is bad. I really don't like ERISA very much. It's what we specialize in. It is a very anti-consumer law. It makes the process extremely challenging for claimants. One of the biggest problems, I should mention that if you work for a government or religious entity, you are not governed by ERISA, and then it's governed by your state law, which is usually better. One of the biggest problems with ERISA is that it strips your right to sue the insurance company for anything above what they owe you anyways. So like if your claim is governed by California state law, an insurance company really denies you poorly and really should not have denied you, you could get let's say they owe you $100. You can get the $100 they owe you. You can get 10 times that in punitive damages, and you can get 3 times that in treble damages for $3,000 instead of the 100. What does this actually mean? Well, insurance companies, when they're afraid of this, they act with a lot more care. They treat you kindly. They ask for information. They engage in a two-way discussion, and they only cut you off or deny you if they absolutely have evidence to do so. That's just not the case with ERISA claims. They cut you off whenever they can because they're not actually afraid of being punished in court, because the worst that happens to them in court is they get sued and have to pay up what they owed you and maybe some attorney's fees to a lawyer like us, which for multi-billion-dollar companies is really not much of a threat. So it's really important to know whether your claim is governed by ERISA, because if it's governed by ERISA, there are certain rules which will apply, which don't apply. The biggest one is that if your claim is governed by ERISA and your claim is denied, you will have 180 days, sometimes 60, to appeal the denial. Do not miss that deadline. If you miss that deadline, you lose your right to sue in federal court. It's one of the worst laws I've ever seen in my life. I don't understand why it exists, but that is the law. So do not miss that appeal deadline. If you're running out of time, you can ask them for more time. You could submit information in the appeal and submit more information, but do not miss that deadline. So if you are denied, one thing you want to do immediately is request a copy of your claim file. If your claim is governed by ERISA, you are entitled to it. You're only entitled to a copy after you're denied. So a lot of people try and ask for it before they're denied, which I think is clever, but you won't get a copy. It will have everything related to your claim in the file, especially the backroom conversations between their physicians, which is going to be really important to attack. As I just said, make sure to appeal before the deadline given in the denial letter. That is the most important rule. It is extraordinarily important to appeal before that deadline. I strongly recommend, if you're denied for LTD or SSDI, consider a consultation with an LTD lawyer. Hopefully a free one. Most LTD lawyers like me offer free consultations. It's a harmless thing to do. You can do it at any stage. Most of us do it happily, and it's really a good way to get information about your specific case. Try to find one who practices in your state. I'll talk a little bit. There's a lot of lawyers out there in a lot of different areas of practice who are just advertising nationally as large firms and don't actually have experience in your state with the judges in your state, and that's often a really important factor. I'm an LTD lawyer, but I'm certainly not the only one. There's lots of them out there. There's lots of really good ones. I like giving referrals to people in other states when they ask. So again, if you need an LTD lawyer, you certainly reach out to me, but there's a lot of great ones, especially near where you live. Oops. Oh, messed up. There we go. So tips for those who cannot continue to work. So the first thing I do recommend, if it's possible, which I know it isn't always with long COVID cases, try the accommodation process first. Remote work, flexible hours, any other kind of support you could need, ask for it, even if you don't expect to get it. The biggest reason is that if you get it, you can try it. And hey, if it works, great, it works. And if it doesn't, that's a really good argument that you couldn't work even if you had accommodations, and it prevents the insurance company from saying, well, you could have worked if you had just tried or just asked for accommodations. Don't stress if you can't, or if you just have to take leave. Some people, get bad really quickly or have a crash really quickly and don't have the time to ask for accommodations, and that's okay too. But just if you have the time and have kind of the ability, it usually can help to ask for accommodations. Before you file the claim, make sure your doctor is supportive, and make sure the support is reflected in the medical records. The best way to make sure your doctor is supportive is have a conversation. It's maybe obvious. A lot of people, sometimes your doctor tells you to stop working. Other times you're the one telling your doctor you need to stop. Just talk to them directly and tell them how you're feeling. Most of the time, it's pretty rare for a doctor to say, no, I think you should keep working, even though you, the patient, say you don't think you can anymore. If that does happen, it's pretty rare. Try to follow your doctor's accommodations if you can. And if you think their accommodations or what they're saying is bad for you, this can't be medical advice, but I consider finding another doctor. Doctors are hard to persuade, or so I've found. So one problem we see a lot is that your doctor is supportive, but the medical records are not great. Or in a lot of cases with long COVID, the medical records don't address the gist of what's going on. It addressed the testing, it addressed the diagnostic work. It doesn't actually address what you're suffering from. And that's a problem with a lot of medical records, because medical records aren't designed for that. Medical records are designed to document your care, not to prove your case to a disability company. So one thing you can always do is look for a second doctor. I know a lot of people with long COVID have their primary doctor and specialists or multiple specialists. Any specialist is good enough to support your claim. If you're at a long COVID clinic and the long COVID clinic won't support you, it can be your PCP. If you're seeing someone else, it can be them. Just really as much support as you can get is usually helpful, but you only need one doctor to support your claim. So if you're seeing 5 or 6 doctors, don't feel the need that you need to get support from all of them. One is usually sufficient. So if I could say one thing to all of you and maybe to a lot of my clients is you don't have to be a superhero. You don't have to push through your pain or exhaustion to prove your strength. I know how hard this is, especially in America with our ingrained bootstrap culture, where it's very hard for us to decide to prioritize our health without feeling the sense of guilt. I know I've been there before too. And all I can say to all of you is, health is more important. Work is not important. Health is, and make sure you're telling your doctors what you're going through. We also, I think we have a tendency sometimes, or what I've heard from some of my long COVID clients with long COVID, is that they worry about telling their doctor too much or telling them all the details, because they're worried that their doctor will think they're being exaggerating or won't take them seriously or even won't document it. It's certainly a real concern. I wish I could snap my fingers and say that would never happen. But in my experience, it often ends up being a much bigger issue when you're not sharing than when you are sharing. The perfect world is having a doctor who you trust, who will hear everything you have to say, and you can share everything with them. But if you're not sharing everything, you'll try and allege things to the insurance company, like certain aspects of your fatigue or cognitive impairment. And if they're looking at your medical records and you never complain to your doctor, they won't take it very seriously. So it's really important to tell your doctors. And for those getting mental health treatment, don't be afraid to tell your mental health providers what you're going through. Some people are worried about their mental health notes getting into a disability claim. You don't have to provide your mental health notes. You can have a summary letter provided by any mental health professional, which documents date of treatment, as well as basically what you're disabled from, what you're going through, and what your diagnoses are. So why long COVID claims are often denied? To add on top of the fact that they don't want to pay claims because of ERISA, there's a lot of other reasons that they go out of their way to deny claims. One of the most common is they classify as I said a little bit before, they'll classify your claim as mental health related, either because your claim started as a mental health claim, because you're having mental health impacts from long COVID, or because you had mental health issues before separate from your long COVID. They will try anything they can do if you have long COVID to call your case mental health related. One of the ways I like to preempt this and to tell my clients to preempt this is make sure your mental health providers are supporting your disability by saying, hey, this person is not disabled from a mental health issue. Their psychiatric diagnoses are not disabling. I also believe as a mental health provider that they are impaired from a physical issue. Now, the insurance company might say, well, we only want support from your physical conditions from your physical doctors. Who cares? It's still a great way from your mental health provider to preempt that argument that they might try to make. And who better to say you're not disabled from a mental health issue than your mental health provider. Even without the subjective symptom limitation, insurers will almost always try to label your symptoms as subjective. They'll try and do it regardless of whether it's well documented or not. I mean, it's easier for them if it's not well documented, but it really does become important to try and keep a log, make sure you're communicating with your doctors, and when possible, make sure to have testing proving whatever you can prove. Now, there's lots of cutting edge testing out there, which is somewhat persuasive. There's lots of not cutting edge stuff, blood tests, medical work, which isn't necessarily going to explicitly prove an explicit diagnosis to everyone, but it's enough to prove that there's definitely something physical going on. Insurance companies will often say, yeah, what they may say is, look, we acknowledge you have long COVID. We don't think you've proven that it's disabling enough to qualify for benefits. And that's an argument they use with a lot of people. And really, there's two kind of big ways to get around that. One thing they'll say is there's no proof of your cognitive impairment. The easiest way to get around that is a neuropsychological evaluation, which you can obtain. They'll also often claim fatigue is impaired, fatigue is not supported. The only way I know of right now to prove debilitating fatigue is with a 2-day CPET. One's located in California, one's located in New York. That's a test we've been using and all LTD lawyers have been using for ME/CFS and long COVID for a long time. Social Security focuses a lot more on organ issues, like the actual impacts on your organs. So if you have heart damage or lung damage or kidney damage that you can prove from long COVID, that will also be pretty persuasive. So as I also said before, claims are often denied because of the fatigue-related illness limitation. Depending on the language of that limitation, it can vary in how hard it is or easy it is to get around it. One of the most obvious reasons that long COVID claims are denied is just a lack of strong medical documentation and doctor support. The most important aspect of your claim is your physician support, followed closely by the medical records. If your doctor's not supportive, or your doctor is supportive, but your medical records aren't, or your medical records conflict with what your doctor is saying, or they support you for different reasons, they will say that the medical documentation is insufficient. The fifth reason that's actually not listed on here, why long COVID claims are often denied, are allegations of what I call inconsistent activity, which I'll explain a little bit on the next slide as well. So I just picked out a few common insurance company denial justifications, which us lawyers always jump on and basically see, it's basically our sign that the insurance company is doing something sketchy when we see any of these arguments. One of the most common ones we see is you are stable. They will say you are stable, thus you are no longer disabled. On its face, the logic doesn't make any sense. If you've been disabled and you're stable, that means you're still disabled. Insurance companies will often misinterpret stable to, for some reason, mean improved or not declining and thus able to work. They really try and interpret it as the new normal. What they're trying to imply is, oh, you're stable. This is your new normal. Now you should be able to work. And if they're using an argument like that, it probably means they don't have many better arguments to use as well. And that's why I like all of these, because that logic applies here too. Another favorite argument we see is you are able to attend your medical appointments. Thus, your physical activity is inconsistent with your stated limitations. Again, on its face, the ability to attend medical appointments does not equate to the ability to do full-time work, especially because you absolutely have to attend your medical appointments, both to heal and to get your disability claim paid. If you didn't attend the medical appointments, what they'd say is you didn't attend enough appointments, so we're not approving you for that reason. So using activity like that against you, I think is pretty uncouth of them. Oops, sorry about that. One recent one that we saw, that we have a claimant who needs constant home oxygen, and say, well, just because you're in such a position to need home oxygen, you can be accommodated with remote work. Basically ignoring the fact that if you need home oxygen, there's other things going on with your brain and body which also impair you. And they basically treated her home oxygen as a one-step cure-all. And we've actually seen that argument a few times over the past years. Another argument we see a lot is you stopped testing positive for COVID years ago. This is basically them saying we don't believe long COVID is real, because they understand that you stop testing positive for COVID, you no longer have COVID. They understand the concept of long COVID. If they're saying there's no more positive COVID, thus there's no more disability, what they are saying is the only thing disabled you was your active COVID infection, and we don't believe in your long COVID. That is also a denial that we certainly love to jump on as lawyers, because they're right off the bat denying that long COVID exists, which is getting harder and harder for insurance companies to defend. It's really what they're shifting to is we acknowledge that it's real, we acknowledge that you have it, but we don't think you've proven it well enough. Another argument we've seen for a long time with a lot of different contexts is you continue to provide childcare for your kids, thus you are able to work. That one's really infuriating, obviously, because you don't have a choice whether to care for your kids or not. If you stop caring for your kids, they could get hurt or or worse, or taken away from you. You don't have a choice, right? We shouldn't be living in a world where we have the same expectations of those, what you have to go through to take care of your kids and keep them alive, along the same path of what you need to do to attend a job. And again, that kind of goes back to our bootstrap culture and this assumption that just because you can do some things means you should be able to do other things. The less ridiculous, from my perspective, argument that insurance companies make is that they'll argue that they've seen you do inconsistent activity, which these days either means something on social media, you admitted to doing something occasionally, grocery shopping, going to the farmer's market, maybe you went for a walk or go for a walk occasionally. What they'll basically say is we saw you doing stuff, and because you were doing that stuff, we don't believe your disability claim. Now, these arguments vary in strength, obviously. The ones I just mentioned are, I think, pretty remote and not very strong, but it's really important to make sure you're telling your doctor the things that you're doing. So if you tell your doctor, I walk my dog once a day, I go to the farmer's market every Sunday, and I grocery shop every day because that's all I can do, you tell your doctor that, and then they catch you doing that, what can they argue? Your doctor still supports you knowing you're doing those things. What they're trying to say is, oh, if your doctor had only known you were doing these things, your doctor would have known you were exaggerating and never would have supported you. So the best way to protect yourself is honesty, is to be honest with your doctor about what you're doing. When they ask, be honest with them about what you're doing. Make sure to harp on the good day, bad day concept. This was a huge thing with MECFS, it's certainly a huge thing now. The fact that you are maybe completely fine 2 days out of 5 does not mean you can work. It doesn't even mean you could work those 2 days out of the 5. If you can't be relied upon on any given day to be good to go, then you're not employable. And that's one of the big arguments that we make is part of the issue. Someone could get up and feel great one day. They could feel almost normal, have a normal day, and then the next day be completely unable to do anything. And that's the nature of these conditions. And that's, why someone with long COVID is often unemployable without extraordinary accommodations. So one question I often ask is, do I need a lawyer? And surprisingly, I think some people are surprised by the answer. I think the answer is at the claim filing stage, not necessarily. I don't like insurance companies. They deny claims all the time. I certainly, don't trust them. But there are claims that are paid without hiring a lawyer. There are claims where you file the claim, your doctor fills out the paperwork, and there's no problems. This money is in my opinion, this money is too important to people to take some of it away from them just to make sure a claim is paid properly before someone actually needs you. What I like to do, and what a lot of other lawyers like to do, is in our free consultations kind of give you the information we would have given you when handling the claim, so you can try and get the claim paid yourself without having to pay a lawyer like me. Because as I tell people, this is food and shelter and keeping the electricity on money, and even giving away a small portion of that, it can be, very scary. But an experienced lawyer can help navigate denials and strengthen your case. And if your claim is denied, you definitely, unfortunately, do need a lawyer. So that is my a little bit too long speech. Thank you all for listening, and we will now go to Allison's questions, or questions that Allison is managing for us. Oh, and one more thing. Yeah, also, before Allison goes to questions, for our arguably one of our specialist slides, this is my contact information. I know that there are questions people may have that may be personal that you do not want to ask in a group of people. If anyone ever has any questions, you can just reach out to me directly. These are all the ways to find us, and I'm sure you know the Longhauler Advocacy site as well, but this is our info, and I will, I think, leave this one up. Questions, well, I'll leave this one up so people can look at it, but what I really mean is questions.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. We appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Bronson. I'm part of the Kantor Kantor team, and I'm going to be handling the Q&A today. We do have quite a few pre-submitted questions, and I do see all of the questions in the chat and in the Q&A. And we're going to try and get through as many questions as possible. I know we're coming up close to time, but if you guys do have a few minutes to stay after the scheduled 60 minutes, we will have a few minutes to stay after. And if not, don't worry about it. We are recording this session and you will get the link after the session concludes. So don't worry about it if you can't stay on. If your question doesn't get answered, we have all of the questions. So we will have the email in the recording as well in the presentation. So by all means, feel free to reach out to either Karyn or Andrew with your direct questions, and they will definitely be able to answer any of your questions as well. So don't think that we're forgetting about you. It just might be a time constraint, but we'll try to get through as many questions as possible, okay? So let's get started. First question is, this is for Andrew and Karyn. Can you walk us through the review process for both SSDI or Social Security Disability Insurance and long-term disability insurance? What should people be doing now to prepare for these periodic reviews?
Well, I think, the best thing to do is to be on top of your medical records, and to be in communication with your doctor and to make sure you know what your medical records say and you know what your doctor's submitting. If you've already been paid, the good news is you just need to keep doing what you've been doing, because there's no reason to expect that they're going to stop paying you necessarily. Yeah.
I would say, from the patient perspective, being organized and informed is your superpower, because your education and your ability to advocate for yourself, especially with the doctors that you need to make this very documentation for you to apply to this process, is a necessity. So there was also a question I saw that kind of related to this topic, which was, I'm going through this process. What makes it different? And honestly, the answer is everything that you did during your initial process, whichever disability program you're applying to, getting those medical records, getting that documentation, not stopping seeking care. The question that was in the chat was about, if I, stopped seeking care, or I told my employer that I quit because my medical history and my medical issues are keeping me from working, stopping seeking that care or quitting, it does affect your claim, because you do want to try and seek accommodations before any of that happens, and build your case as strong as possible. So the key points are: continue to be organized, like Andrew talked about, continue going to your medical appointments, documenting those things, reporting to your clinicians the impacts that you're experiencing, both from the disease, but also from the medications that you're taking, right? For example, if you're taking something like propranolol or something else that affects you with nausea or increased fatigue or inability to sleep or a million other things, those are important to bring up with your provider too, because those medications and the side effects from those medications can also play a role in strengthening your case.
Fantastic. Okay. Question 2, and this is again both for Karyn and Andrew. How can we as patients help our clinicians better document our issues to not only actually help us medically, but to provide the quality of documentation required by the disability process?
As far as, educating your doctor is a doctor specific endeavor, I think. And it's something that, ironically, I think I'd kind of pass to Karyn, because my advice to my clients is, your doctor better than I do. And I'm happy to help however you can. There are some doctors who love having guidance from lawyers, and there's some doctors who they see lawyer email them and they run for the hills because they think they're being sued for malpractice. So it really depends, I think. I'm curious what Karyn thinks.
I think this leans into the last answer as well, which is being as informed as you possibly can, so that you know what your arguments are, right? For example, if I'm going to a certain doctor, I know why I'm going to them, right? I know what symptoms I'm going for. I know what condition I'm going for or suspect I'm going for. So being able to bring them credible materials and documentation on those things, especially as it relates to long COVID, while still limited, we're 5 years in and there is research coming out that can support many of these. One of the most important and powerful resources that you can educate them with, especially if they're a clinician who maybe is one that doesn't believe in long COVID or minimizes long COVID, is sharing with them the NASM long COVID definition and also the open letter that shows that it was adopted across HHS. In addition to that, showing them the long COVID acceptance under the ADA and bringing them credible information that shows this is a real disease to take me more seriously. On the other hand, if you're having to jump through hoops like that and really, push your case and you continue to get, pushback, it's really important for you to definitely diversify your clinicians and try to seek a second opinion. The other thing is, do you have a clinician that you know is a good advocate for you? Because clinician to clinician or colleague to colleague communications is a really strong tool behind the scenes. And we do know that doctors don't necessarily like listening to patients, and we are commonly told, I'm the one who went to medical school, but we're the ones that live with this every single day and understand our bodies and are following the science to date. Without clinician education or anything top down, they're left with the responsibility of seeking information on their own, which many don't do. So anything you can do to strengthen your advocacy and understanding, provide them with credible materials, and try and facilitate or find a clinician who is your ally, who could maybe be a convener or a coordinator of your care amongst clinicians, is a powerful thing. And I've personally had to do this recently in multiple forms where another clinician has stepped in to advocate for me in another area of care. And I'm very grateful to them for doing that. But again, if you find yourself constantly having to fight and getting no moves with your doctor, definitely seek a second opinion.
Ask another question, Allison. I was answering a few of the quick questions on the webinar chat because I know we're not going to be able to get to all of them.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, next question. When will Social Security formally recognize long COVID as a disabling condition? And what can be done to reduce the current 3 to 5 year wait and multiple appeals so many applicants face? And this question is both for Andrew and Karyn.
Oh, I wish I had better news. Vote, I really, it has to be, the change has to be from Congress. It's got to be from the top down. There's no real way to lower wait times other than getting more funding. And, especially things like government shutdowns, it's just going to create more slowing. So advocacy at the top, voting for the right politicians who care about the right stuff. God, I wish I could have better answers on how to fix the system, but.
Yeah, I mean, I would add on to that legislation is important, and so is funding for the Social Security Administration. A couple years ago, I was in a meeting where they talked about, I think, the legal requirement in the Social Security aspect for reviews annually is something like 20%, and they were not meeting that criteria by any means. The process is extremely delayed by the length of the review process for applications and appeals and all of that. So one of the ways that we frequently talk about in the long COVID community, we get denied once, we get denied twice, you get to the hearing, and most people end up being successful in the hearing out of the majority of the stages for this. Getting to that hearing means everything that we talked about before, right? Having the proper documentation, having clinicians on your side. So if you have some of that from the very beginning, you increase your chances of being successful earlier on. It's by far not a means of, absolutely getting on, but the sooner and stronger you can make your claim, the better odds are of your time and application process being cut down, because there are months to years between the appeals process that you have to then wait for.
Great. All right, going to move on to the Q&As that you guys submitted during, and I know Andrew is trying to help me by answering some of the questions, so I appreciate that. But for the ones that he's not, let's tackle some of those. So first question, I've had days and or weeks where I feel good and can work, but I never know when a wave will hit and I'm out of commission for who knows how long. Is it reasonable to apply for Social Security disability?
That's a good question. It really depends. If it makes it so that you're not employable, then I think you do apply for SSDI. If you have a job where you're able to do basically work under these terms and you can earn more than $1,600 a month, I don't think you would qualify. But if the other concern is doing this, like working when you're good and then crashing, if that's making you worse, and you should stop working overall for your health, I think that gives you a better argument for SSDI. But I think you need a doctor to argue that for you. So you'd have to get a step further beyond just saying you can only work a few days. You'd have to kind of go further and say you shouldn't be working at all.
I agree with that statement. That's one of the biggest parts of long COVID is the ups and downs and inability to predict how we're going to react to certain actions, whether it be cognitive or physical. And I want to emphasize for a lot of people that are applying, they and their clinicians also strongly focus on the physical visible aspect. And it's really important to also take into account the cognitive aspect in terms of even sleep and processing and ability to understand and complete work in the manner of which you used to prior to getting long COVID. There are a lot of aspects to long COVID, and there was another comment in the chat before asking about an appointment with neuropsych. That is different than normal psychology, and that's somebody that you would go to that would evaluate the cognitive aspect of long COVID. For me, that's who diagnosed my cognitive impairment, which is part of my disability claim.
Yeah.
Next question.
I'll take a question. Oh, I just click answer live. Oh, how neat. Okay.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm new with this, right?
Go ahead. Yeah, you can. Go ahead.
Are you more likely to be approved with multiple health issues or worsening health issues in addition to long COVID? Do you apply for disability based on one health issue only? It's a really good question. You should apply with all of your conditions. I think it's more common that people have long COVID and other things than just long COVID. Mast cell activation is a really common one, POTS. And, not just the things that are connected in some way to long COVID, but people often have other issues, back issues as well, also mental health issues. I do recommend applying with all your conditions. The one thing to be wary of, though, if you're going to argue about mental health issues, make sure you argue that they are secondary to your long COVID or even caused by your long COVID, so that the insurance company doesn't have a chance to limit your claim based on the mental health issues.
And personally, for my experience, both through workers' comp and Social Security, was just that. I obviously have COVID from long COVID, from COVID, and that has triggered an onslaught of secondary conditions, some of which you mentioned, POTS, lupus, cognitive impairment, migraine, gastroparesis. I can go through a list of a bazillion things. But one of the things that my attorney really stressed that was important was the use of residual functional capacity forms for every single condition that I have. So I applied for Social Security under long COVID, and under all of the other conditions it has triggered. However, my claim is recognized actually as long COVID, which was a huge win and very rare at the stage of which I got that approved at. And that all came from an excess amount of documentation and testing, and what really changed the game, and I was denied the first 2 times and had to go to a hearing. What really changed the game was those RFC forms and my attorney taking the time to educate the judge and occupational reviewer that they have at these hearings on what long COVID was, and providing information that validated it as a real condition, especially that early on. And then with that being recognized, that then helped my workers' compensation case.
Great. Okay.
Want to take it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll take a question. I got one here.
Take the question? Okay.
Yeah. Once paperwork has been filed with insurance related to other mental health issues, is it possible to get those records removed when the doctors revise letters? If you are asking about having your own medical records changed before they are sent to the insurance company, it is possible, but only if the change is to change something factually incorrect. So under HIPAA, you have the right to accurate medical records. And if there's something that's inaccurate or wrong, you do have a right to have it changed. In my experience, you can also ask a doctor to change anything, but they also have a right to say no. If you want your own insurance, your own medical records to not reflect a diagnosis or something, that's pretty difficult to get done. Once you've already submitted if you're talking about paperwork submitted with the disability insurance company, you can't unsay what you've already said, but you can certainly change your argument. You can say, hey, I filed this claim for mental health issues. The reason I'm disabled now is from this other thing or from these other things. But there's no way to take back or unsay what you've already said. Okay. All right, let's see. Do we have time for a few more?
Yeah, we have time for a couple more.
Okay. You wanna do one?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I had to work when my original claim got denied. I was able to do 30 hours a week, but unable to do anything else but work. That employer gave me issues the entire time about missing work, so I quit. Is this work going to hinder my SSDI application this time around?
Yeah, probably. Honestly, it depends. It depends on the circumstances surrounding you quitting. The reality is, if you were able to do 30 hours a week, you'd probably be able to do that in another job, and then you'd earn more than $1,620 a month. So, if you're able to do that amount of work, then you're probably not going to get the claim approved. But if you're able to explain somehow that you're not able to do any hours at all and you were pushing yourself and you shouldn't have been doing 30 anyways, and that's why you quit, like that could be, I would talk to a Social Security lawyer if I could. It's a kind of a nuanced argument. Okay, I'll take the next one. I realize all the questions, you're all looking at the same questions. I thought you had special questions that I didn't have. Sound like my father now. My LTD was just denied after 5 years because I am on SSDI. My LTD benefit is only $1,200 a month. The first attorney I spoke with about appealing said that my case is not high value enough for them to take, even though he said it was a very strong case. Is this uncommon? Suggestions for finding someone who will take the case? Oh, very interesting. So when a attorney is considering taking on the case for the appeal, which is before litigation, the only way the attorney can make money usually is either by charging you hourly, which we don't like to do, or taking a percentage of the benefits we get for you. And in this case, something like 20 or 25%. So I'd say $300 a month in fees to do your appeal. Now, that's not terrible necessarily, but to do a full-blown ERISA appeal can take dozens of hours. And so dozens of hours of work where you're not even guaranteed to I just completely lost my train of thought. You have to do dozens of hours of work for potentially a really low recovery. It's just not something that the lawyers would take on appeal. I see this a lot. We have this sometimes too. What I usually like to do is give the person free appeal advice, basically. Tell them what I would do on the appeal, give them the guidance I would give, review any of their documents for them, so they can appeal on their own and make sure the case is ready for litigation. Because if the case is once the appeal is denied and we can litigate it, we make money by potentially charging you a percentage, but we can also get our hourly fees from the other side, which we cannot do during the appeal. So Rebecca, I don't know where you live, or, if you have Social Security disability and your LTD claim has been denied, you do have a strong LTD case. That's one of the biggest factors we look at, because Social Security is technically harder to get. So the attorney's assessment is probably right. You probably do have a very strong case. If you can't find, depending on where you live, if you can't find another lawyer who would take it on, I would be happy to help you with the appeal for free, because it sounds like it'd be a good case to litigate. I don't know where you live, and you may need a lawyer who operates in your state. But I would, email me and I'll take a look. And once I know where you live, I can also give you some referrals to someone who lives near you as well, if you don't live near me. But yeah. Let's see. Okay, we have another question. So this is kind of a general question. So just to understand the difference between Social Security disability and Social Security supplemental Social Security income. Supplemental Social Security comes into play. It takes a income qualifier into consideration. So basically, you have to have less than a certain amount of money to get SSI. SSDI does not have an income qualifier, so you can get it separately, and it doesn't matter how much you make. And they are different applications. You have to apply for them separately, and SSI can get canceled once you get SSDI, because you're getting too much to now qualify for SSI. You'll still get Medicare through SSDI after 2 years. Okay, let's see. Let's see if there's any more questions. Do I have a list of doctors that treat long COVID and accept workers' comp in Southern California? Well, this is actually where I live, Southern California. I do not have this, any kind of list like that, unfortunately. But one thing I would want to point out is it's going to be very hard to find a good long COVID doctor who also accepts workers' comp. From my understanding, good long COVID doctors are often specialists, and they're often kind of on the higher end of things. And there are not a lot of workers' comp long COVID doctors out there. So I would ask a workers' comp attorney. Nancy, if you shoot me an email, I can give you a list of workers' comp attorneys we know who you can ask in Southern California. And I would ask them that question. Because I would have no idea of who takes workers' comp. Okay, here's another question. What happens when your contract ends with the company you filed LTD claim with? How does this relate to a conversion privilege? I may need to apply for LTD around December for a job I have contract with until July, but the conversion privilege section of my policy says you may not convert your insurance if you are not in active service. Okay, so you have two choices, really. You can either file the claim before the coverage ends, or you can convert the coverage and then file the claim. But you should have the right to do one or the other. So what I recommend you do is reach out to your HR department and ask them what it takes to convert the policy, and by when you have to do it, just so you understand. But if you have to apply for LTD in December, you should qualify in December, and the benefits usually last longer than the term of the contract. So let's say your contract's about to end in 3 months and you become disabled. The policy will usually pay you for a year, even if the contract ends in 3 months. So it still makes sense to file that claim, even if you're considering potentially converting the policy if you don't. Okay, we got one more. There's a few. Okay. Sorry, it looks like there's one more disability question I can answer. Okay. I've had a disability lawyer since I filed on 11/2023. I just had my appeal hearing and received another denial. The denial is based on pretty much everything you've discussed. Yeah, you've got this thing, but you haven't demonstrated equal disability. Is there hope, and how can I improve my chances either with the appeals council or if we start over? That's a good question. The appeals council usually assesses fundamental errors in the decision, and without knowing whether there were fundamental errors according to their standard, it's really hard to know. But I would consider, if you haven't done it, a 2-day CPET or a neuropsychological evaluation. If you apply again, but I'd really, you have to ask your disability lawyer what they think. They're going to be in the best position to answer that.
Andrew, can you talk a little bit, this is a question that we got pre-submitted also. Why do they not count gig work or self-employment for Social Security?
Why do they not count it for tax purposes, or why do they not count it? What do you mean? What?
A lot of people who are self-employed, I guess, don't qualify for Social Security, as you talked about, having the work credits and paying into the program. So I think a lot of it comes down to the taxes and paying in and that aspect.
Yeah, it really all comes down to taxes and how they're filed. And unfortunately, I know even less about taxes than I do about workers' compensation. So you'd really have to look at how the taxes are being filed, and if you're working for Uber or Lyft, like what the relationship is with them. And I know in California they're not contractors anymore, so I think the rules may have changed about how you have to file, but unfortunately that's a little bit beyond me. So.
Can I ask a question on behalf? It kind of goes along with talking about different employer plans with LTD though. And it's one question that was in the chat. So that didn't get transferred to the Q&A. So I'm gonna ask for her. Do decent LTD plans exist outside of employer plans for people not in occupations like law and medicine? Do GSI plans exist for other occupations or other LTD plans that are good by chance?
Well, yeah. Doctors and lawyers are just an example I used. Really, you can get an occupational policy no matter what your job is. Just go to an insurance broker and ask them for it. If you have options, ask them for Principal Insurance or Northwestern Mutual. Those are two companies that I sue the least, so I assume that they must be pretty good. But you can absolutely talk to an insurance broker, and they should be able to point you in the right direction. Okay.
Awesome.
I think that's about all we've got. Are there any I missed in the chat? Let's see.
Just one last one I see that we didn't answer, which is I spoke with an attorney about appealing, and he said my cause was not high value enough for them to take. I'm assuming this may be about back pay amounts and things like that. I'm not sure, but
yeah, it really just comes down to the numbers. I would definitely talk to more than one lawyer. 10 lawyers, 11 opinions. I can't tell you how many cases I've taken from other lawyers who wouldn't take a case, or we had different perspectives. It also often depends on their workload. Some lawyers are a lot busier than others. Some lawyers are looking for work. So I don't think there's harm in trying to get a few extra opinions.
awesome. Thank you for taking some extra time to answer as many as we could for our community today. We definitely appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was great. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to email me. Our information is still up. Otherwise, hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks everybody.